Welcome to the Personal History Hub. This video is going to be on the riot of 1965 to 1967, and we're going to look in more detail at the Watts riot and what caused that specific one. So, a bit of background then to what was happening with these riots. So, despite the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act that was passed in 1964 and 1965, many young Black Americans were still very frustrated. And those who lived in ghettos felt anger at the high rates of unemployment, continuing discrimination, and poverty that they experienced. During the 3 summers of riots between 1965 and 1967, more than 130 people were killed, and the damage totaled more than $700 million. The first large-scale riots was in New York City in July 1964, 2 weeks after the Civil Rights Act was signed. It began when a policeman shot a young Black man, but it was also a reaction to ghetto conditions and violence in Mississippi. Riots followed in other northern cities. So the Watts riot then. So on the 11th of August 1965, the frustration exploded into a major riot in the Watts district of Los Angeles in California. It was caused due to alleged police violence when arresting a young Black man called Marquette Fry, who was accused of drink driving. 6 days of looting and arson then followed. The Californian Army National Guard were called in. Governor Pat Brown declared that law enforcement was confronting guerrillas fighting with gangsters. Governor Parker likened the rioters to the Viet Cong. The riot involved 30,000 people and left 34 dead. 1,072 were injured and 4,000 were arrested, and this caused about $40 million worth of damage. After this, there were many summer riots every year in different cities. These were mainly in the north, the worst being in Chicago and Cleveland in 1966 and Newark and Detroit in 1967. Summer was when ghetto conditions were at their worst and the heat made tempers short. So there's the newspaper headline from the Los Angeles Times the day after the riots in Watts. Why did these riots even happen in the first place? So while specific incidents sparked off the riots, the long-term cause was the problems faced by Black Americans in city ghettos. So despite Marquette Fry being arrested in Watts, it wasn't necessarily just that incident that was causing people to riot. That was more just the tip of the iceberg, the spark that set it all off, the catalyst. So there was police discrimination. The police seemed more concerned with harassing young Black men than keeping the ghettos safe. They were quick to shoot suspects. In the 30 months before the Watts riot, the police shot 65 Black people. So 27 were shot in the back, and 25 of those were actually unarmed altogether. Discrimination by white officials. City officials did not respond to complaints about issues such as badly repaired roads or landlord harassment in ghettos. They were twice as likely to be unemployed, so workers mostly had unskilled, low-paid jobs in ghettos. They were twice as likely to be poor. Landlords, mostly white people, crowded them into cramped, badly repaired, overpriced housing in these ghettos. There was a very poor quality of education, so schools were run down, under-equipped, and lacked funding. So this, therefore, also then repeats the cycle of them being unemployed when they're older, having lower-paid jobs. So that's typically what a ghetto might have looked like in the 60s. So the actual pattern of the riot. So while over 80% of the rioters were young Black men, they had support in the community. Many Black people saw the riots as reaction to the actions of white people. Black violence during the riots was mostly aimed at property, such as white-run stores that discriminated against Black people, not white people. More Black people died in the riots than white, so often shot by white police or by troops that were drafted in. The Watts riots led more Black people to join Black Power groups and more white people to react against calls for equality. On the other hand, the publicity drew attention to ghetto problems, and King visited Watts during the riots and decided that the SCLC must campaign in the North. President Johnson said the riots convinced him to put more money into improving ghettos. The riots usually followed the following pattern. So there was a trigger incident, often involving the police, just like the one with Marquette Fry in Watts. And minor attacks on property would happen. So, for example, brick throwing, window smashing. That would then lead to increased violence and looting, especially at night when it was dark. And that then led to state troops being brought in to stop the violence. So That would then lead to promises of reform being made and calm then therefore being restored. Don't forget to subscribe to the Personal History Club. The next video is going to be looking at a consequence of these riots called the Kerner Report.